Hey, guys.
What's up, G?
Want to go to Chachki's? Get some coffee?
Oh, it's a little early.
I gotta get out of here. I think I'm gonna lose it.
Uh-oh. Sounds like somebody's got a case of the Mondays.
How about I have a case of the why is there a 5-day work week and can we get another weekend day? And maybe we can make that Monday so nobody has the case of the Mondays anymore. The point is, shut up. Okay, thanks. Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Cinema Psych Podcast, the podcast where psychology meets film. I am your host, as always, Dr. Alex Swan, and today we're going to be taking a little work trip, and we're going to be discussing Office Space, the 1999 classic. And I'm calling it a classic because I really think it is a well done comedy movie, a farce on office life. And to be honest, like that kind of office life doesn't exist anymore in some ways. So it's really a product of its time, and a lot of the stuff that is discussed in the movie and portrayed in the movie is very 1999. And one of the central ideas surrounding Office Space is the second half of the movie is where they're trying to get the fractions of the cents to accumulate over time. And it turns out they end up extracting $300,000 in a day or something. Something wild like that. But the premise for doing that is because the company that they work for is so invested in changing dates for the year 2000, which was an important thing to do. So instead of using 2-year dates, change everything to 4-year dates. And the way those dates are calculated in processing was really important in 1999, and people were working up until that. But of course, 1999 was the time that companies basically, software engineers had to figure out how they were going to handle a new century because computers didn't really exist at 1900. So there you go. Computers were in our brains. That's the kind of insight you get at this amazing podcast. Yes. So the film was written and directed by Mike Judge, who you might be familiar with. He did shows like Beavis and Butthead and King of the Hill. Those are the two cartoon comedies that he is most known for. And the film stars Ron Livingston. First of all, what happened to Ron Livingston? He's really good, and you don't see him in much anymore. He was kind of a flash in the pan kind of actor there. I haven't really seen him in much or heard him in much. Playing opposite him is Jennifer Aniston, somebody who has not disappeared. She starred in this movie as, Friends was skyrocketing. This was sort of right in the middle of Friends that this came out. So, she was a big draw for crowds who were like, oh, Jennifer Aniston's in a movie. Let's go see what she has. Let's go see if she plays a different character from Rachel, which we all know and love her as. And yes, love her. You can fight me on that one. And then there were a few other people that really haven't been seen much of after this. David Herrmann plays Michael Bolton. No, not that Michael Bolton. No relation, just a coincidence. Kind of hates the music of the other Michael Bolton, which is great. AJ Naidu plays Samir. He's been in a few things since, Office Space blew up, mainly right after. But, he's still been working. Diedrich Bader, of course, been great character actor. Love his character as the neighbor Lawrence. Stephen Root plays Milton. My stapler. I'm going to burn this place down. That I used to do Milton with my friends so often. It's been great reliving that because my friends and I just did that over and over and over again. Gary Cole plays the meme you're probably familiar with. I'm gonna need the. He's that boss. Gary Cole, Bill Lumbergh. Oh, so good. I think the first time. Now this is probably going to be quite strange, but I think the first time, obviously, did not see Office Space when it came out in 1999. It's obvious to me as to why, but listener, you may not know. I'm not that old. I'm going to be 36. I had a couple of weeks at the time of this recording, about the time that this episode is published. And so in 1999, I was not allowed to see movies of this nature, especially with the F-bombs and the Jennifer Aniston flipping off her manager at the end and a couple of customers. That's the kind of stuff that I was not allowed to watch. So I didn't see Gary Cole in this particular movie as my first representation of Gary Cole. No, my first representation, my first film with Gary Cole in it he was playing Dad Brady. Well, I can't even think of that. Mike Brady. There we go. He played Mike Brady in the sort of spoofy parody Brady Bunch movie with a whole new cast that was made to look exactly like the original cast. So that's the first time I saw Gary Cole, and I thought he was hilarious. And I see him in this movie, Office Space, and it's just like, oh my God, this guy is so good. And of course, if you've seen him in a bunch of other stuff, he's got a lot of range. And a couple of other people that I love, Richard Riley, I love him in everything. He's a fantastic character actor, but his Tom Smykowski, or Smykowski, excuse me, character is so good. And then John C. McGinley as Bob Slidell, a few years away from Scrubs, but still doing some character actor work, and he's got some great facial expressions in this movie. Of course, none that you'll be able to see. So, and before we jump into the guest, I do want to hear from you, dear listener, on how this movie, if you've seen it, how it sort of, how you think about it now versus how you thought about it then, or maybe, you saw it maybe 10 years ago or something like that. It's just, it's iconic. I hate using that word for movies, but it's one of those iconic ones, and it dropped in the year of film. The year 1999 has some of the best works, and it's so good. It's so good. So I want to hear from you about this movie. It's particularly a fun one for me. And the guest we have on today is perfect for talking about an office environment. We're going to go into a not often discussed aspect of psychology for this particular episode. We're going to be talking about industrial organizational psychology, sort of the business industry side of psychology. Like, how do people work together in a business environment? How do people do things together in that particular environment? So that's going to be fun. Couple of tidbits for you before we jump into the main segment of the show. Our guest shared some interesting tidbits that are quite fun. So the tchotchkes, which isn't even spelled correctly, I guess because they wanted their customers to be able to pronounce it, but the tchotchkes restaurant that Jennifer Aniston works at, was modeled after TGI Fridays. And if you've ever been to TGI Fridays, at least before, the year 2000, they used to have flair. They used to be all about this flair thing, which is what tchotchkes makes fun of. The fact that they're wearing tchotchkes, right? Shortly after this movie and people started making fun of them, they were done. No more. They changed their image. There was no more of the tchotchkes or the flair that they had on their things. It was great. The other sort of MacGuffin-y kind of object in the movie is the swing line stapler, Milton's stapler. The red. I like this swing line because it doesn't jam, and it allows me to put my collation together. And I was told that I was allowed to listen to the radio at a reasonable volume. And yes, my stapler, it's a swing line. I like it. I don't like the other one. I didn't like the other one. That's my Milton. Oh my God, I love doing Milton. Anyways, thank you for indulging me on that one. Went a little too long on that one. But anyways, the swing line stapler that is used, not red originally. They painted it red so it would stand out because on black on film kind of gets lost in the background. So they wanted the stapler to pop, especially when Milton was talking about it. So they painted it red so it would show right up on the film. And Swingline decided to produce red staplers because of how iconic Milton and that damn stapler were. So, and it became one of their best sellers, if not their best, just because of this movie. Because of this movie and the fact that a red stapler just stands out. I'm going to make a particular statement with my red stapler. The last tidbit has to do with music, and it doesn't. The reason why I'm telling you all of this right now is because it doesn't really apply to our conversation, but it is interesting. So in 1999, a lot of the movies that were coming out were very central to the time, but in a more sort of, this is kind of acceptable music, quote unquote acceptable music, like rock or jazz or other kinds of music that's been used in movies before, with a white cast. And Mike Judge said, no, this is a movie about screwing the system. And what better music than screwing the system than rap? The producers hated it. The producers hated the idea. They wanted to include popular songs for the time period. So, as films move on to the decades and more people watch them, they could get a sense of what music what music people were listening to in 1999. Well, don't worry, you can find that anywhere, dear listener, as if you haven't heard a 90s tune before. But I think it was more of a money issue, because not only did they not like the music, because they thought, these black artists were singing for white cast members, I think it was a money grab, because they would have gotten higher royalties every time somebody, purchased the movie, because they would have had a record agreement, or they would have had an agreement with the music that there was revenue sharing there. So I think that was a money thing. But could you imagine this movie with different lyrics behind, Ron Livingston's Peter walking in and just not giving an F about anything because he's under the hypnotist's calming, sort of half hypnotized spell. Imagine Chumbawamba instead of damn, feels good to be a gangsta. Imagine just flipping that script. It just sounds awful. We are going to dive into that idea more. Stay tuned. We will be right into it. My guest host today is Ed Hansen. Ed earned his Ph.D. from the Combined Social and Industrial organizational psychology program at Northern Illinois University. Wow, it's a mouthful. In 2014, and he now teaches as one of the specialized teaching faculty members in Florida State University's psychology department, where he teaches a variety of courses including IO, research methods, psych of personality, and social psych. You might also recognize him from NITOP or the STP Facebook page, one that gets shout out a lot here. This page is actually how Ed and I met and conversed and talked about our love of movies. And so that's why he's on the show today. Ed, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much, Alex. Yeah, it is pretty funny. Like during the pandemic, I just started noticing like, hey, this Alex guy, everything he shares, I'm connecting to it, and whether it's movies or your teaching approach. So I was kind of secretly hoping that you were going to invite me to do one of these someday. So I'm very glad to have the opportunity.
I'm always looking in the weeds. I'm just like Homer behind the bushes. Not thinking about anything in particular, but I am watching. So yeah, I'm very happy to have you on. And again, maybe it was my blinders, I suppose, that I didn't see that sooner. But sooner is better than never, right? I messed up.
100%.
Right.
I was a late bloomer too.
Yes.
It's okay.
Thank you. Okay, I appreciate that. So before we jump into discussing Office Space, I always like to ask my guests, especially those who are also instructors of psychology, what their thoughts are about film as a art form in general, and then using film in classes you're teaching, that kind of thing.
Well, as an art form, I have always loved film. When I was in high school, my dad and I, we really bonded over watching movies together. We would watch those American Film Institute 100 Greatest Movies, 100 Greatest Comedies, and we would watch things that we would have never otherwise heard of. And it led to so many good discussions with him. And so we fast forward now to when I was in college and I took a world cinema class, which was eye-opening in a totally different kind of
right.
I didn't love every movie, but some of them today are still my favorite films of all time. And I had such great conversations about a lot of them. So I've always loved film, but at the same time I was taking that college course, I was introduced to psychology in college. I started as a different major. I changed as a sophomore.
And that's me too. We were just joking before the show, listener, before we started recording, how very similar our life trajectories have been. But no, please continue.
It's true. I might be Bizarro Alex. From
okay.
A different or
I could be Bizarro Ed. I mean,
it's true.
These are two very common white person names. So
yeah, we'll see if we get to the bottom of that by the end of this episode.
Perhaps.
But no, like I was discovering my interest of psychology and I was drawn to how it applies to our everyday life. And of course, film applies to our everyday life in so many ways. Even an absurdist comedy is going to relate to our life. And so with my students, I'm always about making it connect to their own lives. I always want to keep in mind that most of my students are not going to be psychologists. What are they going to take away from this? How is this going to be meaningful? And using film is a really, really good way to do that. Now, I rarely go into like full on dive into the deep end, showing an entire movie.
Okay.
I think that myself, I'm a little too distractible. So I worry if my students are going to focus on the wrong details, but
not the movies that I play for them.
Well, with Office Space, I don't know. I don't want them to just remember the O face. I want them to remember the IO face.
The IO face. Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. And so, no, in reality, though, I sprinkle in these clips. I make references to things they've never heard of. But by showing them the clips, it really solidifies it for them. And hopefully it's a nice way for them to connect to the material in an even better way.
Yeah, I fully agree with that last sentiment. And for anyone who might be at the APS STP Teaching Institute, that's the message that I'm bringing for my talk. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to that. Thanks for that quote, Ed. I appreciate it. I'm just going to, I'm blazing you on the title slide there because it sums up exactly the message of the talk. So I might as well just not give the talk. I'll just play that clip I'll just stand awkwardly at the podium and just play that clip of you because I'm going to have
we
the
saved
recording.
a lot of time today already.
Yes, it's perfect. How no prep. Well, now that we've discussed film in general, Ed, I wanted to get your take on the why behind choosing Office Space for our discussion today.
Well, when you reached out to me, part of me was like, well, I'm open to anything. If he has a great idea and it's a film that I like, let's dive into it, and I'll look at something in a new way. But then I realized you've done almost 50 episodes, and there hadn't been a single IO film. And
yes,
I was
on
a psychologist.
No, I'm just kidding.
This is kind of a sore spot for us, Alex, because IO is neglected in so many general and introductory psychology books. And it's really perhaps one of the most applicable to our students that are not going to be going into research fields. They are going to be working in jobs. And so psychology of the workplace is just infinitely relatable. Even if they don't see it today, they will see it down the road. And it just so happens it's one of my favorite cult classic movies anyway. So it's a great IO film. One of my first IO teachers, Lisa Finkelstein, she was a big fan of the film and used it a lot when she was teaching her organizational psychology class. So a lot of good reasons to pick this one for sure.
And I'm so glad you did, because I sheepishly will say, but I will be honest, that yes, I was neglecting IO, and it may have been on purpose. I'm just kidding. I don't think it was on purpose. But you do raise the point that it's not on our radars, and we feel bad about that. And I am. Well, I guess I should speak for myself and not for everyone. I feel bad about that. I'm actually going to restructure my intro psych class. I haven't been teaching it as the typical formula for many years now, in the topic per week or like sub-discipline per week or whatever it is. I kind of teach it as a scientific literacy course, and I'm actually going to even dive further into that. And so with what you just said about IO and the psychology of the workplace being applicable to not just the psychology majors, but pretty much anybody who takes a psychology class, it's something useful that they can take, in whatever profession that they're doing their major in.
Right. I mean, pandemics notwithstanding, most of our work experiences are with other people, right? So for me, I was actually introduced to IO in grad school. I went there with the social focus, and then I started seeing all this applied social psychology in the workplace, just like it can be applied in sports psychology or political psychology. The psych of the workplace, it just really pulled me in.
Yeah, and so as part of a push for the meld of the two, knowing what the psychology is, the science of that, but making it useful for everyone to be there and to be a part of my conversation, I'm really trying to figure out ways to not flip a 101 style class but still have engagement, with a more lecture-y format kind of in-class kind of vibe. So IO's making a comeback, and it's pretty much just because you said what you said just now, Ed. I've made the decision. You can write that on your CV.
I'm going to put that on my CV. Exactly right. Yeah. I feel very good about this.
Perfect. So I am glad that you chose Office Space, because while it was not my first Mike Judge movie, actually Beavis and Butthead was my first Mike Judge, even though I wasn't allowed to watch it. But then King of the Hill, I was allowed to watch that for some reason, I guess because it was on network TV.
Because I was on network, that's much safer.
Yeah, much safer. Although it was kind of funny because I wasn't allowed to watch The Simpsons. So I think my parents were doing a calculation between Bobby Hill and Bart Simpson, and they were like, Bobby seems more like Alex. Let's have Alex model himself on Bobby and not Bart. That's the only thing that I can think of.
Fair enough.
So let's jump in to the IO aspects, and because I am coming as a IO novice, Ed's going to indulge me in a little learning I know that he just started a summer class, but I'm going to ask him to teach me IO 101 here. So what I think the structure of the discussion, Ed, is discussing characters in their environments. And it sort of, the movie to me is two movies. And so I think a lot of the focus does come from the beginning half of the movie, if you will, which is a focus on the tagline, which is work sucks, because it does. And so I want to talk about the two main characters, Peter, played by Ron Livingston, and Joanna, played by Jennifer Aniston, and an exploration of their work environments. So, Ed, give me some IO love in here.
Okay, so one of the great things about teaching IO is that so many of my students are already coming in with so many relevant work experiences.
Yeah.
You know, some of them have worked in offices. Some of them have many of them have worked in restaurants. And so these characters, for better or for worse, their experiences are relatable. And so where I like to really start off with Peter, of course, he's the main character. But also one of the things that really drew me to the social IO program at Northern Illinois was they had a scholar, Amanda Durek, who worked in motivation. Mm-hmm. And motivation is one of these notoriously difficult things to pin down because like the motivation chapter in IO, it's like, okay, here's a list of all these theories and they all have moderately strong implications for the field. So it's
so take your pick.
You don't want to just focus, but you know, they know the difference between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation.
Sure.
They know a couple of the basics. But you talk about a person like Peter, and oh my gosh, this poor guy, he just doesn't have it in him to do this software job anymore.
Right.
Right. It's unclear how long he's been doing it, but he's in his 20s, so not for that long. And so he's trying to find the motivation, but when he's talking to the Bobs, the consultants,
mm-hmm.
and he says, it's not that I'm lazy, it's that I don't care. That is one of the classic quotable lines from the film.
Right.
Next batter looks like a Peter Gibbons. Uh-huh. Oh, there you are. We were just talking about you. You must be Peter Gibbons. Uh-huh. Terrific. I'm Bob Slidell. This is my associate, Bob Porter.
Oh, hi, Bob. Bob?
Pretty much go ahead and grab a seat and join us for a minute or two. You see, what we're actually trying to do here is we're trying to get a feel for how people spend their day at work. So, if you would you walk us through a typical day for you?
Yeah.
Great.
Well, I generally come in at least 15 minutes late. I use the side door. That way Lumberg can't see me. And after that, I just sort of space out for about an hour. Till I'm
space out?
Yeah. I just stare at my desk. But it looks like I'm working. I do that for probably another hour after lunch, too. I'd say in a given week, I probably only do about 15 minutes of real, actual work.
Peter, would you be a good sport and indulge us and just tell us a little more?
Oh, yeah. Let me tell you something about TPS reports.
TPS stands for?
The thing is, Bob, it's not that I'm lazy. It's that I just don't care.
Don't care?
It's a problem of motivation, all right? Now, if I work my ass off and Initech ships a few extra units, I don't see another dime. So where's the motivation? And here's something else, Bob. I have 8 different bosses right now.
I beg your pardon?
8 bosses.
8?
8, Bob. So that means that when I make a mistake, I have 8 different people coming by to tell me about it. That's my only real motivation, is not to be hassled. That and the fear of losing my job. But you know, Bob, that'll only make someone work just hard enough not to get fired.
Would you bear with me for just a second, please?
Okay.
What if, and believe me,
This is so hypothetical.
but what if you were offered some kind of a stock option equity sharing program? Would that do anything for you?
I don't know, I guess. Listen, I'm gonna go. It's been really nice talking to both of you guys.
Absolutely. The pleasure's all on this side of the table, trust me.
Good luck with your layoffs, all right? I hope your firings go really well.
And he goes on to talk about it. He talks about, well, okay, why should I care? Why should I work harder? Why should I work harder to crank out a few extra lines of code every day, every night, putting in this extra work? In a tech, the company is going to make a little bit extra money, but I'm not going to see a dime of that. And so this goes back to like a classic cognitive motivational theory, Vroom's expectancy theory, where he talks about there's three main components to motivation that lead to an increased effort. We're seeing a lot of withdrawal from Peter, but in theory, we're trying to maximize effort. So first of all, it's kind of like the growth mindset. Is more effort going to lead to better performance? If a person thinks that if they work harder, they're not going to perform any better, well, they're not going to work harder. But then the instrumentality and the valence portion are where Peter is really, really struggling, because he actually seems like he's good at his job. He seems like he knows code. He seems like he knows the software code, and that he doesn't feel a lack of competence.
I agree, especially with the whole TPS reports.
He just forgot.
You know? Yeah, and he has to tell so many people that it was a quick mistake.
But so he says, all right, so if I perform better, will it lead to a better outcome? Well, not for Peter. He just established it that he's not going to make more money. He's not going to get a promotion. He's just going to have worked harder to created more widgets, if you will, right? And
the classic widget problem.
And so the valence, is the outcome valued? Absolutely not. He's going to work himself into the ground for a company that doesn't really care about his well-being. And that's a major theme right now, is like, what is the company's responsibility for the mental health of its employees? That's not something that was being talked about so much in 1999 when this film came out.
I think it's a great film to watch now, and I sort of felt similar thing, or thought them similar things, with current discussions on Twitter and other spaces regarding work these days, and the message of the movie.
100%.
Wow!
Like, there's this massive group of people that, for not just one reason, a collection of many, many reasons, are leaving their bad jobs, right? They're just saying, you know what? It is time to take this job and shove it. That's one of the songs in the movie. It's time to just say, like, I really don't need to continue this. Like, sometimes people continue in a bad job because they think they don't have any options. But through the pandemic, we have seen we've got options. We don't have to move to the city to work for the big company if we can remotely. We can do all these different kinds of things. We don't have to be so geographically constrained anymore. And again, that's just like one component, right? Not even talking about toxic workplace and bad leadership and all these other kinds of things. But getting back to like Peter's motivation, is he intrinsically motivated, or is he extrinsically motivated, or is he just totally apathetic, right? So he's mostly apathetic. The Bobs ask him, the Bobs being the consultants, well, what if it was some stock options? Would that be enticing to you? And he looks at me, he's like, I don't know, maybe. But it's not really tied to anything that great. And when you look at, we'll just say a typical manager, they say, yeah, I want to wave a carrot in front of someone. I want them to work harder, so I'm going to give them a bigger carrot. Why wouldn't that be a better way to motivate them? And it's because they have to care about it. They have to like see these other things. So another classic motivational theory is like self-determination theory. And in order for a person to be even have a conversation of whether or not they can be intrinsically motivated to succeed or to do something, kind of have to have three things. You have to have autonomy, competence, and relatedness. Competence, we already talked about. He doesn't really suffer from that. He knows how to do his job. Relatedness, it even seems like he's got a little cohort of guys that he feels like, okay, these are my people. He feels like a bond with Michael and Samir, and he shares his experiences with them.
He even talks on the phone to Milton Nobody
Yeah.
likes Milton, and he even talks on the phone to Milton, right?
100%.
So a lot of I would say high relatedness in his profession.
But the lack of autonomy in a tech is soul crushing.
It's so rough. And
Right? It's
to
like-
work in that cubicle, I would ask to be moved, to be honest, if I had to sit next to thank you for calling Initech. Oh, please. Or whatever. Whatever it is.
Just a moment.
Just a moment. Oh my God. I would die.
Have you ever worked in like a cubicle office space?
I have
before?
not, luckily. I worked in fast food, but of course things are moving rapidly in those places. But no, I have not worked in an office like that.
Fortunately, me neither. I've never worked in the food service industry either. So that's just another good thing. When I talk to my students, I remember once when I was even a student, I said, well, it can't be as bad as people describe. And uniformly, they're always like, no, it's worse.
Yes.
Than we describe. We're not telling you the unmentionable things that happen.
Right. Yes. I would say I luckily did not have many of those. And I don't know if I could remember any gnarly ones. But yeah, when people say, yeah, this is really crappy, it's 1,000 times worse.
Yeah. But I mean, for Peter and the whole crew over there, the lack of the lack of autonomy over what they're doing, the lack of control in, it's like how they want to spend their day, how they want to spend their time. Like when Lumberg calls him and he's not coming in on Saturday and he says, just so you know, it's a full schedule. It's not a half day. We're here the whole day. And, millennials, I'm not crazy about any kind of generational research. It's so oversimplified.
Right.
But, younger workers today are looking for a lot more flexibility in their schedule, which again, at that time wasn't really a thing. You just showed up when work was working and that was it. And you were probably going to do some overtime to boot. But now we've got flex scheduling. We've got people doing condensed work weeks, all kinds of things. So that's been a pretty positive change.
Yeah, I think they could have gone in. They could have gone in a lot deeper with that too. They
definitely had other things they wanted to do with the film, but in 90 minutes, I think they cover quite a bit.
Yeah, I do like that. And Hawaiian shirt days. I'm glad that Peter rips off the "Is this good for the company?" question banner. Oh my God.
Yeah, and it's, sometimes they say, well, you're not motivated. Let's try and change the workspace. Let's try and make it a more motivating workspace. Putting up those little inspirational posters with the pictures of kittens and teamwork underneath and all these different kinds of things are very, very motivational. They would want you to believe, but of course that's not how it works. So giving people, that's autonomy at Initech is Hawaiian shirt day a week from Friday.
Right.
Not this Friday. It's not even an every week thing. It's just like coming up in 2 weeks, Hawaiian shirt day.
Yes, and a random person coming around going, "Whoa, look like somebody's had a case of the Mondays."
Oh, a case of the Mondays. I find myself saying that when I have a case of the Mondays to other people, just to bring them into my case of the Mondays.
When I was younger, when I saw this movie in high school, when I was younger, as a follow-up to this, I would say, "Oh, looks like somebody has a case of the insert any other day other than Monday."
Oh.
So somebody has a case of the Fridays. What does that even mean? Well, you're excited. I don't know.
Just go with it. Just go with it. Don't
just
say
go with
no.
it.
Haven't you ever taken an improv class? Just go with this.
Yes, and me.
Oh my goodness.
So, which one do you think best explains Peter's overall character arc in the movie?
That's a good question. When you say which one is it, I'm always so reluctant because it's the lack of autonomy and the fact that he doesn't see him working hard leading to anything good. I think I would go with I think I would go with Vroom's expectancy theories just because, like, no matter what he does, he doesn't see this getting any better.
Mm-hmm.
That depressing ass quote when he talks about every day is the worst day of his life.
Yes.
Because since he started working in the office, every day is worse than the one previous.
So I was sitting in my cubicle today and I realized ever since I started working, every single day of my life has been worse than the day before it. So that means that every single day that you see me, that's on the worst day of my life.
What about today? Is today the worst day of your life?
Yeah.
Wow, that's messed up. I'm sorry. Go on.
Is there any way that you could sort of just zonk me out so that, like, I don't know that I'm at work in here? Could I come home and think that I've been fishing all day or something?
That's really not what I do, Peter. However, the good news is, I think I can help you. I want you to do something for me, Peter. I want you to try and relax.
And so, to me, that's no longer about, he doesn't just want to do the software without having to do the TPS reports. It's a much bigger issue than that. So
Yeah.
he doesn't see, if I change my approach, if I have better outcomes, I'm still going to be in this dead end job. And I think that that's the biggest problem for him.
Yeah, and I'll add on to that I think Mike Judge shows that rather well with very few words in the beginning of the movie, where he is in traffic. He's stuck in traffic. He sees the lane next to him move, and so he gets into that lane. And of course, our eyes are always bigger than our stomachs when we do that, and so of course the lane stops, and so he weaves back in, and that lane stops, and without any words, essentially, he shows every person's nightmare who has grown up in a moderately dense or highly dense area.
Yeah, and I mean, he's going nowhere in his job. He's going nowhere in traffic. No matter what he does, he's always making the wrong choice. There's literally nothing he can do. And he sees the elderly man with the walker just pulling away. He sees the world going by him. I don't know if you ever felt that way in grad school, but sometimes you saw people going on and having lives, and you're like, I'm still here in grad school. And that was a real experience. But I mean, at least we still had some autonomy over what we were trying to do. So I do come back to the being able to take control of your life in some way. Then he starts to totally disengage. Then he starts to totally withdraw. And he's hilariously rewarded for it. And equity theory, he's seeing is like, okay, normally when we talk about equity theory, I'm working harder and other people are getting rewarded.
Mm-hmm.
He's seeing his colleagues working harder and he's the one getting rewarded.
Right.
So he's actually really sensitive to that. He feels guilty about it. He doesn't want the promotion, and he sees his friends who actually are pretty content in their jobs. They're not happy, but they're more content in their work than he is. And they're the ones that are going to get the short end of the stick for just trying to do the right thing. And so he's sensitive to the inequity. And he also sees it in Joanna's job. So, I mean, I think he starts to have an influence in her life as well.
Yeah, that's a perfect segue because I wanted to jump to Joanna next. Before I do, I wanted to add in there with the, accidental promotion that he gets, and that he sees his friends, which is why he comes up with the other movie, the other half of the movie. Where I referenced this is essentially two movies. The second half of the movie is this classic. Let's just skim some fractions of cents off the top in this pre-2000s computer world, and will eventually make a lot of money, but it'll be slow. And then the next day they have like $300,000, and they're like, we're gonna go to jail. He comes up with that whole plan because he sees the inequity, which is great.
Oh, yeah. When people feel that they work in an unjust workplace, there's all kinds of counterproductive work behaviors that they can do. That's like a very IO term, CWB's counterproductive workplace behaviors. And it can range from sabotage to withdrawal and not working hard. It could be. I knew someone who will remain nameless at a summer job I had when I was a kid who destroyed some company property when he felt that he was being unjustly singled out for various different things. He had to do way more random drug tests than the rest of us that summer. They just didn't like him. And so he took it out on the company. He was destroying company property, and it was this counterproductive workplace behavior. But sometimes it can just be not malicious, but maybe it's just like, Alex, I feel like you and I are both prone to excessive small talk if we don't check ourselves. And so that can definitely be counterproductive in the workplace as well. But yeah, it was leading up to this big thing. And of course, Milton is another good example of that we can unpack later.
Yeah.
With his retribution.
Got to talk about Milton for sure.
But no, the second half of the movie was all because of inequity in the workplace, for sure. An unjust workplace.
I would agree. Yeah. So the two sort of meld together. I won't say that they're two completely separate movies. Of course, that doesn't make much sense. But yeah, you can kind of see that there are two plot lines that both have resolutions to them, and one kicks up while the other one sort of dwindles down. But before we go into any of the sort of tertiary things, I want to talk about the other main character, played by Jennifer Aniston, Joanna. So, Ed, tell us about Joanna's job.
So Joanna is a waitress at Tchotchke's.
Mm-hmm. Spelled incorrectly.
Probably just because it's more fun that way, Alex.
Probably because people wouldn't have been able to Chkat.
Oh my gosh. And like when she agrees to go to lunch with him and you learn that there are two identical restaurants, a Chili's and a Flingers on both sides of the Tchotchke's. Oh my gosh. That's
strip mall America though, don't you think?
It is. My in-laws are from Orlando. I've seen these places.
Yes, I used to live not far from a collection of these, sort of like on opposite blocks. Actually, speaking of CSUN, Cal State Northridge, where I did my undergrad and master's, had the major street behind it did have like literally these similar dine-in restaurants sort of along this street, maybe 1 block and a half later or something like that. It was rough.
Oh yeah. And I mean, so she probably doesn't love her job. There's like she walks into the Flingers and she's like, oh, this place is nice. And it's probably just like the place that she works, but without the terrible environment and culture and boss and leadership. Oh my gosh. So poor Joanna, when she's having that conversation with the boss, I think that conversation, if you were to pick one clip on its own that could work the best with a college student audience, it's the manager talking to her about her flair.
And
We need to talk about your flair.
Really? I have 15 pieces on.
Well, okay, 15 is the minimum. Okay.
Okay.
Now, it's up to you whether or not you want to just do the bare minimum or, well, like Brian, for example, has 37 pieces of flair on today, okay? A terrific smile.
Okay, so you want me to wear more?
Look, Joanna.
Yeah.
People can get a cheeseburger anywhere, okay? They come to Tchotchke's for the atmosphere and the attitude. Okay, that's what the flair is about. It's about fun.
Yeah. Okay, so more than, yeah?
Look, we want you to express yourself, okay? Now, if you feel that the bare minimum is enough, then okay. But some people choose to wear more, and we encourage that, okay? You do want to express yourself, don't you?
Yeah.
Okay, great. That's all I ask.
Oh my gosh. That's the requirement for the job. you're asking her to do the job. You're not asking her to do the job in the way that you see fit. And of course, there's that terrible coworker, Brian.
Oh my gosh.
Who's just like
really
bouncing off
guy.
the walls. Everybody really hates that guy, which is a credit to the actor. I wish I knew the actor's name. He did an amazing job. But the fact that he's wearing 37 pieces of flair, and she says, if you want me to wear 37 pieces of flair.
His name is Todd Duffy.
I hope Todd Duffy has had a good life because he has made me laugh many times. And he's got a lot of flair, and she's supposed to meet that expectation. And one of the things that it always reminded me of from an IO perspective is that in any job, there are these extra things that you are supposed to do, not for yourself, but for the benefit of the company.
Yes.
And these are called organizational citizenship behaviors, OCBs.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a variety of different categories of different OCBs, but women in particular are punished for not doing OCBs. It's kind of the expectation that they're going to be a more helpful coworker, that they're going to be a more courteous coworker, a more thoughtful coworker. Whereas if men do these more communal OCBs, it's like, wow, look at Alex. Isn't that so nice how he's always willing to help? If someone needs a substitute teacher, he jumps right in there. That's so nice of him. He's so nice.
Yeah.
And if a woman is nice, they're like, yeah, I appreciate her niceness, but it's almost a given. It's the expectation.
Yeah.
And it's this double standard that they are held to much different standards. And here you also have someone that's going above and beyond in some ways. We don't really know if she's a good waitress or not. They don't really get into that. But he does tell her that she should smile more.
Mm-hmm.
And now there's a lot of loaded language whenever a man tells a woman to smile more.
Of course.
But emotional labor for people in the service industry, whether it is customer service at an airport or in a restaurant or talking to your cable representatives, whoever. Emotional labor, you got to fake it till you make it. And that takes its toll. And the boss says, they come here for the atmosphere and the attitude. And just by that statement, I was like, neither of these seem very good at Tchotchkes. This is a toxic work environment. I don't want an overpriced burger at a place with a bad attitude and a bad atmosphere, but that seems like, at least from the wait staff's perspective, exactly what Tchotchkes is. And I think, again, students would really resonate with this part of the movie just because, sad but true, they have a lot of examples of poor work environments in the restaurant industry. It's a tough business, but it's also one, he's saying to her, you want to be the kind of person who does the minimum. How much you want to bet that she makes the minimum? Right?
She probably makes less than minimum.
Less than the minimum because she's on tips.
Probably.
Right? So she is making less than minimum wage and being asked to put out this maximal effort and to express herself through flair. And so, boy, it's just really bad there, Alex.
Yeah, I can dig that. I luckily never had a work environment like that. Even McDonald's. Because really everyone was doing their minimum there.
Fair enough. Yeah, I always feel a little guilty when we talk about our work horror stories because I've never had a quote unquote bad boss. That would be an interesting one. Bad bosses would be an interesting one to sort of unpack for IO. Horrible bosses, right?
Yes, horrible bosses and horrible bosses too.
But no, I've never had the boss that I really didn't like going to work for. Probably the closest I ever had was just the boss I didn't really see very much, which is not better, but we just kind of slacked off anyway. And like you say, this is not a situation where we were highly intrinsically motivated to do a great job at our summer jobs while we were college students.
True. And I wanted to add to your description of OCBs. It's more of a comment than a question. I think I could have guessed if you had said to me, which gender do you think bears the brunt of the OCBs, I think I would have been very quick to say women in this case, and that differential kind of behavior that you got there, because it is completely unsurprising to me, but also very appalling.
Well, sure. You look in even forward-thinking academic departments, for example, women faculty members are consistently on more committees than male faculty members. And this would be an example of the OCB civic virtue, right? Nobody wants to be on more committees. Nobody wants to be on more, sometimes we have the ones that are near and dear and close to our hearts,
right.
But otherwise there are some of these things that we're going on them because, well, someone needs to go on them, and I guess I'll do it. And unfortunately, women just fall on that sword more often than not.
Right.
And they're not always going to be rewarded for it either. While we're on it, the other two are conscientiousness and sportsmanship.
Okay.
Conscientiousness is, of the big five, really the one that Iowa psychologists spend the most time thinking about.
Okay.
It's definitely going to be the gold standard. Like, if you want to look, it predicts so many positive things for like academic success, but it's also going to predict a lot of positive outcomes for success in the workplace, missing less work, getting things in a timely fashion. If you're hiring conscientious workers, you're already ahead of the rest of the field. So it's definitely the gold standard from the big five. And then sportsmanship is just kind of like, it's a little harder to pin down, but it's not gossiping about people in the workplace.
Okay.
If you get a raise, not to say, hey, did you get a raise too? I got a raise. I feel pretty good about it. And so you can tell your significant other, you can tell your mom, they want to hear about those things. But your coworkers, that's not the place to be talking about those kinds of things.
Now, does that, you said it was hard to define, but the question that just popped in my head is that what about other successes? So successes that are personal, right? So not company successes, but successes that are personal, that don't have this the same sort of connotation as, oh, I got a raise. Did you get a raise?
Yeah, I think that isn't necessarily going to be a negative component of sportsmanship, right? I mean, some cultures are definitely more open to like talking about our families and talking about our personal lives at work. And it's definitely, some people think that's really inappropriate is the honest answer, right? Some people think it's like, why does Alex always talk about his kids in class? Why does Ed always talk about his kids in class? I've had, this said in a student evaluation, for example, right? And so sharing your successes or those kinds of things, some people will find it more acceptable or more offensive than others, but I think it really has more to do with those like work salient things.
Okay.
So it's like, I just got a compliment from the boss who never gives compliments, or I'm going to just sort of make other people feel bad about the way that things are going for them, or if downsizing, if everyone knows that it's happening, that's definitely an element of this film. Is like, sometimes you do know that one of your colleagues is unlikely to make it through this downsizing process. And so how do you manage that? I think that's more of a reflection of the OCB of sportsmanship, probably. Okay.
I like that. Yeah. For the whole, this is not downsizing, but it is downsizing sort of.
So for
vibe.
example, not telling Milton that he's no longer on payroll would be bad sportsmanship.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, we're going to take a quick break and get back into some of the other IO things that Ed has in store for us. So stay tuned, listener. We'll be right back. Howdy. Thanks for listening to this episode. We hope you're enjoying the conversation. Over the past 2 years, the podcast has grown, and that's mostly in part to folks like you, the listeners. We've also had wonderful luck receiving support from the Society for the Teaching of Psychology, APA Division II Small Partnerships Grant. It's been a fun ride, and we want to keep it going. So we need your help. There are several ways that you can support this show. You can share episodes with your social media networks so we can grab new listeners. You can join our fledgling Patreon program. You can contribute directly using PayPal. Or you can purchase some sweet merchandise with our logo at our Spreadshirt merch store. All of those things can be found on the website cinemapsychpod.swanpsych.com. But perhaps the best thing that you can do is to keep listening and leave us feedback on Facebook or Twitter so we know you've listened. Thanks. And now back to the show. And we are back with Dr. Ed Hansen. He is talking to us today about Office Space, the cult classic from 1999, the best year in film, in my opinion. So, Ed, we were talking about in the first segment, we were talking about the two main characters and their jobs. Now I kind of want to move into the periphery of the film and talk a little bit about the characters that surround Peter and Joanna. And I love the note that you wrote about the Bobs, because they're consultants in the film that are brought in by Initech to downsize the company. And you said they give them a bad rep. Please expand on that.
Well, I meant that they give IO consultants a bad rep,
sure,
because I think that a lot of the time, who was the character that said they're bringing someone in? You know what that means. There's this fear,
right,
that any time an outsider comes in, that it's going to be anything you tell them can be held against you. Anything you tell them can be used to get you fired. And in this case, he was 100% correct. But in many cases, that's not the case. So, you have to acknowledge that this kind of consulting 100% does happen, right?
Okay.
You bring in people that they are trying to find ways to increase efficiency. And, I feel like it's worth noting that increasing efficiency, before anyone really cared about like mental health at the workplace or anything like this, it was all about psychologists trying to figure out how to do things more efficiently. Frank and Lillian Gilbreth, way back in like the 1920s, they did all these studies, a lot of them with the military, and they did what are now referred to as the time and motion studies. And so it's kind of like, if you know how to shoot a gun, or if you know how to take apart a gun, but you go into the military, they're going to teach you the most efficient way to do those things.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
And all of this definitely was tied back to the work of Frank and Lillian Gilbreth, where they were saying, okay, any job can be done. What is the most efficient way that we can do it? Kind of like what made early McDonald's such an immediate success was like, we're going to get everything on a production line. We're going to do everything really fast. Ford Model Ts are being done on the production line. The Industrial Revolution didn't happen that long ago, and everything is about efficiency, efficiency. Simultaneously, workers are like being worked to the bone. This is when unions start to come in and they like, okay, we need breaks, because if we just are working on these, especially like mindless tasks, we're going to lose ourselves. We're going to drift far away. We're going to go somewhere else, and we're not going to be able to be as efficient anymore because we haven't had a break.
Right.
So efficiency isn't always about doing the absolute most in the least amount of time. And then sometimes a business would realize, wow, by giving breaks, we can actually increase efficiency more. So all of that was kind of early IO psychology.
Okay.
Now you jump ahead to what these guys are trying to do, and they're trying to trim the fat. They're trying to find who is not working out. And so that is definitely going to rub a lot of people the wrong way, including some IO psychologists. So like the author of my textbook that I use, he's actually passed, but his name is Paul Mashinsky. And it was kind of his life's work to make this really good IO psychology textbook. And he shared a lot of his consulting stories from over the years.
Okay.
There was one of his stories where he had collected all this data for a company. And I said, wow, this is amazing. This is so rich. And look at these people. We want to reward these people. And Dr. Mashinsky's like, well, we told the employees that this was anonymous. So I can't tell you who those people are.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, we're not trying to punish people. We're just trying to reward people. And you can see where this is going. Paul's like,
Oh,
no, it's I can't do that for you. And he said, well, we could do another survey where if you want to collect information and tell them that this is going to be to potentially reward good employees. And they're like, no, then they won't be honest. We want the honest information.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, can't do that for you. Like, we can do the second survey. And then they basically stopped working together because he said, I won't do it. And they're like, you're trying to squeeze us for extra money, 2 surveys, or 1 survey for the price of 2. And so sometimes you are going to have those things happen. This is an example I talk about with my students as something that happens in a lot of fields, whether it's clinicians or IO psychology, but the science practitioner gap.
Yeah.
Right? You have what the science says, then you have people out there and they're doing their own thing.
Right.
And so finding good people to cross that gap, that's such an important job. That's why I tell my students that, they want to go and be clinicians. And even though I don't have a clinical background, I say, well, you want your clinical work to be informed by research. You want to be a good consumer of research. And so my IO psychology students that are going to go into consulting, they say, Dr. Hansen, I don't want to do, like master's thesis and dissertation and all this stuff. And it's like, yeah, but you need to know how to sort through this information and tell the company what is evidence-based and what isn't.
Right.
And so those kinds of things. And to the Bob's credit, they're asking questions like, what is it that you would say you do here?
Right.
And so they're trying to say, what are the critical components?
What you do in Initech is you take the specifications from the customers and you bring them down to the software engineers.
Yes, that's right.
Well, then I just have to ask, why couldn't the customers just take them directly to the software people, huh?
Well, I'll tell you why. Because engineers are not good at dealing with customers.
So you physically take the specs from the customer?
Well, no, my secretary does that, or the fax.
So then you must physically bring them to the software people.
Well, no. Yeah, I mean, sometimes.
What would you say you do here?
Well, look, I already told you. I deal with the goddamn customers so the engineers don't have to. I have people skills. I am good at dealing with people. Can't you understand that? What the hell is wrong with you people?
It is a good example of someone who is just sort of the superfluous go-between middleman position. And so a lot of what IO psychologists actually do when, say they're, instead of trying to help a company fire people, say they're trying to help a company hire people.
Okay.
And we want to make sure that these are not backroom handshake deals. We want to make sure that these are going to be, especially if we're going to support like diverse and inclusive hiring practices, we want to make sure that it's going to be based in those KSAOs. What knowledge, skills, abilities, and other things do you actually require? What do you need in order to do this job? And if your selection criteria is not based in those KSAOs, if it's not job analysis based selection criteria, get it out of there.
Okay.
And this is so hard because like you'll come up with a nice structured interview for a manager to use. And then the manager's like, I just get a good read for people. And so you've got all these biases that are coming in.
Right. And that's makes the whole situation worse.
And that perpetuates the problem.
Right.
Right. And so when a person says, well, I just get a good read for people, usually that means they're hiring people who think the same way that they do. It's not exactly going to support diversity in thought. So you're going to have people that are going on their guts, going with their intuition, not asking people the same questions. It's sort of like tech companies, probably like Initech. They could have included this if it were done today. If there was a job interview question where they ask you these super creative, outside of the box kind of questions where it really doesn't have anything to do with your job, but they say, how many basketballs do you think fit in this room? And so you're like, I don't know. And they want to know if you're like deflating the basketballs or are they regulation basketballs? They want to see your thought process.
Sure.
But it has nothing to do with anything that's important. And so it kind of reminded me of when they were talking to poor Michael Bolton and they get sidetracked by the, hey, what do you think your favorite song is? Oh, I just love them all. And they still don't like him. He's trying to play ball. He's trying to tell them exactly what they want to hear.
Right.
He said, I even told those guys I like Michael Bolton's music. And he's just trying to do what they think they want him to do. And he's still not rewarded. They still don't see that he's a good software engineer. So they give IO psychologists a bad name because they don't stick to the script. They don't focus on just the KSAOs. They let their biases affect them.
Mm-hmm.
But like I said, these consultants exist, and they are not one of the shinier, nicer sides of IO, but IO psychologists also do know how to go in and figure out who's not really contributing to the bottom line. Because really, I have a friend who is a IO psychologist for, let's just say, a very large corporation that does a lot of movies and has theme parks.
All right.
And she's worked for them as an IO psychologist for a long time. And I say, wow, you've worked for them for so long. Why do you think this company values IO psychology so much? And she says, the honest truth is that they don't even think about it. It's just that you show them why it's valuable. And you really have to demonstrate. And so in many ways, people entering the IO field, the biggest challenge for an IO psychologist is showing people what you do, showing people why this is important, showing people how the company can benefit from utilizing this knowledge. So it's our secret power, and we've got these things that not a lot of people know about. But even a person who's worked for a major corporation for a long, long time, it's not like IO psychology is at the top of their to-do list. Like, oh, we need to think about these things.
Oh, I feel so bad for IO consultants. I'm real. I exist. See me. Please, I beg you. This is why I'm valuable. Please accept my worth. Oh, that's so sad. So sad. So would you grade the Bobs in their job? Then what would, yes. What would you grade the Bobs if they were your students, like doing like a little mock consultation?
Well, I would definitely mark them down for not being able to look past Samir's difficult to pronounce name. Boy. That was a tough one. But no, I think that we didn't get a very big sample of their work. I would say it's passing, but there's some issues. I'm comfortable saying that.
Okay. We can't get a letter grade on John C. McGinley. Okay, that's fine.
Oh, John C. McGinley in his performance gets an A+.
That's true. Yes. I will co-sign that.
Just the subtleties in his performance and like how excited he gets when you can see he's gearing up to ask Michael Bolton what his favorite Michael Bolton song is, or if they're related. The subtleties in his performance. I heard that they basically they got those shots done in like a couple days. They just went in, did their stuff, they were out, and they did it well.
Yeah. Even that same kind of, he even has the same sort of excited affectation when he's gearing up to ask Peter about the stock options. Like you can say, if from scene to scene, he just has that same giddiness. Like, what about stock options?
He does a lot of things with his shoulders and his mouth, and it's a lot of wonderful nonverbals. I would say him and Gary Cole, those are my two favorite performances in the whole film. Gary Cole is Lumbergh, of course.
Yes, and that is a perfect segue to the next topic that I wanted to ask you about, which is management. And the detail is dropped in the conversation between the Bobs and Peter that he has 8 different bosses. One of them is the VP of it's on his door, and I can't remember.
It's on the parking spot. I know that he's the vice president of something important, but let's get into this.
Yes, so Lumbergh is a VP. He's one of the bosses. So
he's the only boss that we know the name of.
Right.
And when you've got 8 bosses, you say, what does that even look like? Well, a traditional organizational structure is probably more of a vertical structure, right? You've got president at the top, a couple of VPs, that are going to oversee a few managers, that oversee a couple assistant to the regional managers, and then you've got the people that work
Some Dwight
beneath
Schrutes, yep.
them, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a traditional vertical structure. At a small company, a lot of the time you have the one boss and everyone kind of works under them, like a small restaurant or something. And that's a very flat organizational structure. But where Peter Gibbons works is what is referred to as a matrix structure.
Oh my!
And you're getting it from the top and the side.
Oh God!
And so basically, you don't just report to your boss; you report to the vice president of sales. You report to the vice president of finances. You report to the vice president of research and development.
Oh my God!
And then you also are going to have people on the side over here that are going to be, I don't know, coordinators of something or other. And so in a cartoonishly elaborate matrix structure, he's got 8 bosses. So when he messes up on the TPS reports, he hears about it on the phone. Lumbergh comes to his office. The other guy comes to his office, and he knows it's a problem. And this is a pre-email movie. It would be nice if he could just email all 7 or 8 bosses at once. I know about the TPS reports, and I still don't think it would resolve his problem.
No, I don't think it would be. I think he would get several reply alls.
Oh gosh, the infamous reply all when it does not need to be a reply all.
Yes, and I think that would be
you cannot get out of.
I think that would be the situation here. Yeah. So let's focus specifically on Lumbergh then, because Gary Cole, as we just said, does an amazing job as a person you would just love to punch in the face. I'm gonna say it.
Love to hate him.
Yeah,
you love to hate him. Now, I'm not a violent person, but I love to hate Bill Lumbergh. And so it's definitely, he's so passive aggressive with everything. Everything is a question that you can't really say no to.
Right.
And we really don't see him lead. I'm glad that you didn't say, let's talk about leadership. You said, let's talk about management, because just because a person is a manager doesn't mean that they are a leader.
Right.
And a lot of the time within an organization, the leaders are not the people in those leadership roles. And so in my class, we talk about, like motivation, there are many, many different theories of leadership, as you can imagine.
Yes.
And it's convoluted and complicated and all these different kinds of things. But when you look at how a person sort of wields their power, well, first of all, you have a very transactional style of leadership where it's like, okay, I can reward you, I can punish you.
Mm-hmm.
Is it reward versus coercion kind of power?
Right.
Then you have the people who are in a legitimate position. It's like, oh, you can't talk back to them because they're the boss.
Okay.
And they're in a legitimate position of authority. Then you have referential power and expertise. And so he seems to have neither of those. He is not respected by his workers at all. And we don't really see that he brings any strengths to the table. I did appreciate very much when the Bobs asked him how much time he spent on TPS reports, and he got this little worried look on his face like, oh, my sweet deal might be in jeopardy.
Yes, and it almost feels like that as the movie progresses, too, because things start unraveling right after that for his character.
When Peter slides the envelope under his desk, they don't really get into it, but Lumbergh is not at his office the next day. He's just kind of missing.
Right.
So maybe he got some bad news. Maybe he got the slip and he was actually canned. This is sort of a dark tidbit, but there were a few different cuts of this film.
Mm-hmm.
And in one of the cuts of the film, he does not survive the fire.
I heard about that a long time ago, but I had completely forgotten.
Probably for the best they did not include that.
Yes. I mean, it would have been Milton's...
It doesn't make anyone feel better for that to happen.
Yeah, it would have been Milton's final act of vengeance for sure, rather than just burning down the building
But he kind of just disappears. So you wonder what Mike Judge's favorite or preferred version of what he thinks happened to Lumbergh is. Hopefully he got his just desserts, but he's probably now the president of whatever it is he was vice president of for.
Yeah, maybe he sweet talked the Bobs, because you don't hear what his answer is. It just cuts to another scene. So you don't see, I mean, he could have just sweet talked to Bobs like, Peter does non-committally, sort of nonchalantly. They love that. So
yeah, he's not a good boss. He is a boss that doesn't support his employees. He creates barriers. He doesn't create opportunities for success. He definitely makes things a lot harder. He seems to have like a really unjust way of determining who is going to do extra work on the weekends.
Yeah.
Maybe he just perceives Peter as spineless and isn't going to say no.
Right.
But also, I don't think Lumbergh is someone that people say no to very often. So I wasn't sure why Peter was so adamant that he was going to be the one that Lumbergh asked to stay in, but he certainly was. But yeah, it's funny. He's sort of this creating barriers, but also an absent or laissez-faire kind of leader.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting. There was a recent review, Harvard Business Review did a survey where they asked like the worst things that the employees' bosses can do. And like 9 of the top 10 are actually what the bosses are not doing. And it's not giving them constructive feedback, not caring about them outside of the workplace, not doing all of these different kinds of things. And really the only like overtly negative thing that they were doing was to like take credit for someone else's idea. That being a bully wasn't the biggest problem with bad bosses. That's like the example that we think of as the stereotypical example.
Sure.
But there's all kinds of inaction and lack of involvement and lack of caring. And I think that's really represented today. We were talking about it a little bit earlier. This movie that came out 23 years ago, it still plays. It still is as relevant as ever. The only thing that doesn't is the computers they're using. I love looking at the old computers.
The whole we got to prepare for the year 2000 because computer clocks. I mean, leave it to Mike Judge to find some obscure problem to highlight in his movie, right? Not many people know why Y2K was such a big deal. It wasn't going to lead to the Armageddon that was prophesied on major news networks, but it was a problem that needed to be handled, and Mike Judge makes it apparent. Got to handle it. A small little company, or though maybe large company, I don't know. It's hard to tell. Mid-sized company that has this many employees gets to work on this problem somehow.
But yeah, I don't think that any of the other 8 bosses that Peter has are any more competent than Lumbergh. I don't think that he was the one squeaky wheel.
Right.
It seemed like it was just a company where they were good at one thing, and that was the profit shares for the stockholders, and they were creating all these chips. But boy, was it was just a very poor work environment. Not the kind of place that makes you happy to go to work in the morning or go home at the end of the day.
Yeah, for several of the characters. And the brunt of it, as we said, is really felt by Peter, but also by Milton. Poor Milton. So let's briefly talk about Milton, because his relationship with Lumbergh seems to span a little bit longer of a time period, that's what's implied, than Lumbergh's bullying of Peter.
I agree.
Milton.
Because I think that Milton has probably been there for a long, long time. And he has a very adversarial relationship, it seems, with Lumbergh.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a term in IO Psych. It's called the Thermodynamics of Revenge. And I can't help but think of poor Milton every single time I say it in class. And unless I, give a lot of context, my students aren't going to know the reference. So I rarely bring it up just as I tell them what the term is. But basically, slight after slight, slap in the face after slap in the face. There are all these different kinds of things. And, a person might withdraw like Peter does. He just stops going to work.
Yep.
He just stops answering emails. And, maybe it's going to be that Milton does a little bit of venting. He tries to. Nobody really listens to him with his attempts to vent. He's just, he tells multiple people what his intentions are if they move his desk one more time or take his swing line stapler.
But of course, they're not listening to him, right?
No.
Granted, he does mumble, I'm going to burn the place, I'm going to burn the building down. So, granted, they had no idea.
So it eventually results in this explosion. And sometimes that explosion is like a fiery I quit, kind of like Jennifer Aniston's character Joanna does when she says, you want me to express myself? Here are 2 fingers I can express myself with. I don't need 15 pieces of flair. And so that is also Thermodynamics of Revenge, but with a less literally fiery end as compared to Milton's.
I like this, how I'm so glad that this term Thermodynamics of Revenge, like what a term that a psychologist came up with. Am I right?
I think the term is older than the movie, so I don't think we can say that Milton inspired the term.
I know, but I'm glad
I'm glad too.
It strikes you as Milton being the perfect example of such a thing, both literally and in the spirit figuratively.
100%.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. All right. Well, there's one more IO topic that I think is useful to discuss with this movie. And again, one of those conversations that has stood the test of time, for better or for worse. I'm going to go for worse on this one. Work-life balance. So in the movie, Peter goes and sees a occupational hypnotherapist, whatever the hell that is, and agrees to go under hypnosis to with his girlfriend, who is definitely cheating on him. And many people know that, including his neighbor Lawrence, who we haven't spoken about at all, but I love Diedrich Bader in that role.
He's an amazing character.
Yeah. Lawrence. Anyways, everybody knows that she's cheating on him, but he goes to this hypnotherapist and agrees to be hypnotized to, I don't know, make his life better somehow. And in the middle of his hypnotism, the hypnotist, I'm laughing, it's not funny, but it is kind of funny how it's presented in the film. Heart attacks are not funny, but when they're played in a certain way, it's hilarious. I'm sorry, I can't not.
Don't feel bad about it. Mel Brooks is one of my favorite movie comedians of all time, and he said, tragedy is when I get a paper cut, but comedy is when you fall into a manhole and die.
Yes.
It's just...
That is 100%.
And I think he would think it's okay to laugh at this heart attack.
Yeah. So the therapist gets a heart attack, and it's in the middle of the hypnosis treatment, and so Peter is just feeling good about himself and just stops going to work. But this isn't really work-life balance, though, right?
Oh, definitely not. I would say, he's been missing a lot of work, but he hasn't exactly been missing it, Alex.
Exactly.
It's
such a good line.
Oh, no, it's fantastic because, well, the pendulum, it seemed like work had totally consumed his life.
Right.
And so then he just let it swings all the way the other way. He's like, no, I'm going to leave no space for work in my life at all. He's going fishing with Lawrence and his girlfriend. They're having a wonderful time. They're watching a lot of Kung Fu. They love Kung Fu.
It's such a random thing.
Oh, the movie would have been a lot different if Jennifer Aniston didn't really care for Kung Fu movies. But no, it's wild. The point where he really finally does achieve what I would describe as a healthy work-life balance is when he's working construction with Lawrence.
Yeah.
At the end.
Right.
You know, he's able to, and there's a lot to be said for going to work and having a job where you can work at work and leave your work at work.
Right.
But there are scales out there. I wish I could remember the researchers or the scales names right now, but there's plenty of people out there. It's a spectrum like anything. There are people who really prefer very firm boundaries between their home life and their work life. And there are people who want to have them very intermingled.
Mhm.
And so like when you're talking about sharing a personal experience, a personal success at work, that says to me that it's like, yeah, your work life can affect your home life in a positive way. Your family life can affect your work life,
Sure. Yeah.
life in a positive way.
Yeah.
And sometimes there's negative spillover too. And, you know, we've all just gone through the COVID-19 pandemic.
Mhm.
We're trying to figure out, well, what about working at home? How does that work for you? It doesn't work for everybody. Some people really love it. Some people are not going to love it as much. But the research shows that most people aren't like hardliners one way or the other. The research doesn't show most people want to be at the office 5 days a week or at home office 5 days a week.
Yeah.
They'd like to have the flexibility. And that's left to the companies to figure out how they're going to pay for a part-time office building when you have full-time rent. But you've got all of these different kinds of things and at play. And yeah, when Peter quits his job and when the other guys, you know, like the guy who's selling magazines, he's
so good.
He's much happier selling magazines than he was doing the software engineering stuff. And so I think that is a nice illustration. Gosh, I would love to see an Office Space 2 COVID edition or something like that. It would be amazing because we're in the middle of this thing that we don't even really have a super great name for yet. We're calling it the Great Resignation, but it's not like people are just quitting. They're quitting to leave toxic work environments.
Mm-hmm.
They're quitting because they have bosses that don't respect or support them. They're trying to find things that are a better fit for their life and where they're at. And so I really do think that when you've got all of these different factors, it's never just one thing. It always depends. But when you've got a guy like Peter at the end, it's nice, but it's also unrealistic, right? Because you have a person that, if I ask you to think of a friend of yours who is kind of always unhappy in their situation, and they say, oh, if this one thing would happen for me, if this one thing would change for me, I would be a happier, more satisfied person.
Yeah.
And that's just not what the job satisfaction relationship research shows at all.
Okay.
That yes, objectively, you have circumstances that are going to affect your job satisfaction.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also a personal affect thing, much like the happiness research, right? You've got this set point. Something great happens to you, you get a promotion, or if something bad happens to you, you get fired. Happy people are going to still be happy people if you check with them in a year.
Yeah.
And people who are satisfied with their jobs,
interesting,
same kind of thing. So if a person says, oh, I got to really change jobs. I got to change jobs. Then I'm going to be happy. If I get this promotion, that's what's going to make me happy. You check in with that person a few months later, and it's like the honeymoon hangover effect, right? At first, they're like, this was exactly the change I needed. It's perfect. And then you check in with them a little bit later, and they got new problems. And it's just, it's unfortunate. Now, you can find a job that is more in line with like a better work-life balance, for example. So I think that if we were talking about how Peter said the biggest problem for him was working hard wasn't going to lead to a better outcome.
Right.
Well, if he's working harder on the construction site, it might lead to a better outcome. He might get raised. He might get a promotion to a foreman. He might get other more lucrative opportunities.
Yeah.
But if you're in a job with no growth opportunities, I think that is one caveat, that it's like, if you feel like, especially in your 20s, it's like he was having a midlife crisis in his early 20s.
Yeah.
And so that's a sad place to be. But it's interesting. Like he achieves this work-life balance at the end. But I also wonder, like, boy, I hope that he's still satisfied with that job a year later, because Lawrence is satisfied. Lawrence has a pretty great life in Lawrence's eyes, right?
Sure.
He doesn't have lofty goals, but he also is content. And there's a lot to say for contentedness. You know, there's many people have a high need for achievement. He doesn't seem to have a high need for achievement, but he's certainly enjoying himself.
And he really enjoys that channel with the
Channel 9, dude.
Yes, with the breast examinations, which was on Channel 9 for some reason in 1999. I could not tell you. All right, well, those are some good.
On that note.
On that note, exactly. On that note, yeah, I want to end the show with you, Ed, by talking about some of the great sort of just random things that we like about this movie. So I would like you to go ahead and go first.
Yeah, there's a lot of great nuggets in here, of course, right? I mean, I think about like poor Michael Bolton. I think about how like the cocktail party effect is forever ruined for him. Most people, we like to hear our name in context or out of context.
Right.
If someone's talking about us, it always cheers us up a little bit. But for him, all self-relevant is kind of gone. I've always felt bad for him in that respect. The scene with the fax machine, I mean, that's a workplace stressor that they, again, there's probably some thermodynamics of revenge involved in that scene as well.
Sounds like you can have some thermodynamics of revenge for inanimate objects. Whew, say that 10 times fast. My goodness.
I'll choose not to.
Okay, that's a good choice. That's a good choice.
But no, yeah, Milton at the end. I know that you've got a strong emotional connection with Milton,
yeah.
So I'll let you talk about Milton.
Well, I think Milton did a fantastic job carrying out his thermodynamic. Oh my goodness, I cannot say it. Why is this so hard?
You want me to say that one?
his physics revenge. There we go. The revenge physics. He does a great job. I think he's the most consistent character throughout the whole movie. And as you said earlier, he says exactly what he is going to do. And I love the end scene where just, again, consistency makes it so good for Milton. I asked for a Mai Tai, but they give me a pina colada. And I didn't want that, and then I didn't want salt on my margarita, and the he's in Mexico, and the waiter is like, no salt, okay, no salt.
He's already not listening.
Yeah, already
to Milton.
Not listening.
He's already planning his thermodynamic revenge on the resort for putting the salt on the rim of his glass. This poor guy, it's a good example. You would think with $300,000 in the bank
right,
and on the beach, he's going to be satisfied with his life. Poor Milton's going to find things to complain about.
Always.
So maybe it wasn't always because he was getting pushed around and his desk was...
Or people were taking his stapler because it's the best when it doesn't get jammed.
Although I guess I don't want to jump to any conclusions.
Yes, I want to end with this nugget. As a cognitive psychologist that studies biases and talks about them in an endless format, the jump to conclusions, Matt, is perhaps my favorite thing. Richard Riley sells this as Tom. He sells this so good, and he thinks it's a wonderful idea, but his comparison is to the guy who invented the pet rock. That's not the person you should be aspiring to be. But
he made a lot of money, Alex.
He did. He made $1 million in 1999. That still wasn't a lot of money, but okay. And so he comes up with this idea of jump to conclusions, Matt.
You know, there are people in this world that don't have to put up with all this shit. Like that guy that invented the pet rock. You see, that's what you have to do. You have to use your mind and come up with some really great idea like that, and you can make millions, never have to work again.
You think the pet rock was a really great idea?
Sure it was. The guy made $1 million. You know, I had an idea like that once, a long time ago.
Really? What was it, Tom?
Well, all right. It was a jump to conclusions, Matt. You see, it would be this mat that you would put on the floor and would have different conclusions written on it that you could jump to.
That is the worst idea I've ever heard in my life, Tom.
Yes, it's horrible, this idea.
And that's all he explains. That's all he explains about the mat. And to his credit, is really invested in it. But his workmates think it's the dumbest idea ever.
Well, also to his credit, when he creates his prototype, it is also literally as he describes it.
That is very true.
He stays true. He stays true to his vision.
He does. He doesn't. He doesn't count out of any pressure from his former workmates on this. He says, "No, this is my dream. This is my pet rock."
Oh my goodness. It's not to like bring it back to IO-y things, but that there are some business managers out there that when they hear that, they're like, why is everybody laughing? That's a great idea.
Yes.
And that's just such a microcosm of how things can kind of catch fire in the intersection of IO psych and the workplace, right? It's like an IO psychologist can be talking about things for 2 hours. A manager picks up on the one throwaway comment, and now that's the new TED Talk.
Right.
And so that we were joking that the jump to conclusions, Matt, definitely could and maybe should be a TED Talk. But but no, we talk about how millions of dollars every year are spent on things like the Myers-Briggs, and it's nice for self-exploration, but it should never, ever be used in a hiring context. And some people just still swear by it. It's just like, oh, I'm sorry that you feel that way. It really works for our company.
Yeah. And fingers and ears when it comes to that kind of stuff because it's so flashy. But on a final note, since you mentioned the MBTI, according to somebody who just cited my paper on the poor theory behind the MBTI, I created it. So
you?
Yeah, I created it. Me and my co-author. Yeah, we created the MBTI. So I apologize, IO psychologists.
Well, that gives me a lot of conflicted feelings. I was feeling very good about our conversation.
I know.
Up until just now.
It's so rough too because I write a paper on how it's crap. So I must hate my own work.
Well, there's a lot of self-hate in this movie too, so it's consistent.
Excellent. All right, I want to thank Ed for joining me, Dr. Ed Hansen, to discuss Office Space. Before we say our goodbyes, Ed, is there anything you'd like to plug or where people can find out more about your work?
Honestly, no. Nothing to plug. Thanks very much for having me. This was a really, really fun time. I've been a fan of your show and your teaching insights for a while now, and it's a pleasure to get to actually chat with you, but also chat with this movie, chat about this movie with you. But if people want to find me, I've always been a social psychologist that embraces being very social, and you can connect with me on social media. So if you want, I'm happy to chat about movies or teaching or anything else via the Facebook STP group. Or you can find me on Twitter at @EdHansen_PhDad.
And I will link that for the folks for the show notes so you can find them. But yeah, that's at Ed Hansen. Don't forget the _PhDad. So, because it's play on PhD, I get it.
Oh, I've loved dad jokes since I was a teenager, Alex.
Yeah, me too. Mainly because my mom would never stop telling them. So I will link that, and thanks again, Ed. I appreciate you being on and giving me that feedback. Definitely.
Yeah. If we could just go ahead and do this again sometime, that would be great.
That's gonna do it for this episode. Until the next one, thanks for listening.